I just assumed that we would agree on most things because when we were dating, we didn't have a lot of conflicts, and we just found that we disagreed on almost everything.
Yeah.
And we didn't know how to solve conflicts because we had 1 hour with a pastor before we got married.
You're listening to With You Podcast, where we talk about real relationships and life transitions. I'm David.
And I'm Tara, and this season we'll be exploring marriage.
Yeah, we'll be hearing couples tell their stories from different ages, stages, and backgrounds.
And we all have a lot to learn from each other, so let's get started.
Sounds good.
Today, we're wrapping up our series of marriage stories as we interview our 10th and final couple. We're honored to be talking today with Gary and Karolyn Chapman.
Dr. Gary Chapman has written more than 50 books, but is best known as the author of The 5 Love Languages. He has been directly involved in family counseling for more than 40 years and recently retired after 50 years of pastoral ministry.
Karolyn Chapman has been involved in the women's ministry and choir at Calvary Baptist Church, and she and Gary have been married for 61 years and have 2 grown children.
Karolyn and Gary have lots of experience living and serving together, and we are delighted that they took the time to talk with us about their own relationship and what they've learned about love.
We hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
Well, we're so excited today to have Karolyn and Gary Chapman talking with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
So we're glad to be with you guys.
We're so glad to have you, and it's been fun to get to know you over the past couple of months, and your willingness to talk with us about marriage, your marriage specifically. You guys have been married 90 years, is that right?
Maybe 92.
92.
I think it's 61, but
Yeah.
Karolyn says that's impossible because she's only 49.
That's exactly right. Way too young to be married that long.
Well, why don't we? Yes, Miss Karolyn.
62, yeah.
62?
62
Woo.
this year in August.
In August.
This year in August.
So tell us about the beginning. Like, how did you meet? How long did you date? Can you tell us everybody loves origin stories now, like Marvel movies. It's all about the backstory.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your origin story.
I know for us, sometimes our stories differ. One person's story is a little different than the other. So we'd love to hear both angles on it, how you met.
Actually, Gary and I guess we met, it wouldn't have been in the nursery at church because he's older than I am. He was out of the nursery by then. But our families were in the same church. And we grew up in that youth group, children's group and youth group together. And Gary was a leader, of course, in the youth group. And I was a follower way back. And, and then he went off to school, and I went later, and because I'm younger.
That's right. That's right. We caught that. So off to college.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I actually dated her best girlfriend in high school.
Uh-oh.
The last 3 years of high school. But when I went off to college, she broke up with me. She told me Chicago is a long ways away, and I think we should go our own way. So she broke up with me, broke my heart because I was in love, euphoric. And it was really 2.5 years later, I was back at home for a holiday, and I saw Karolyn at church. And I thought, man, how did I miss her? And so we had a long conversation after church that Sunday morning, just catching up with each other. And I could hardly wait to go back to church that night to see her. So that's how it started with us in terms of our relationship personally.
And Karolyn, when did you notice him?
That was my question too. So you knew each other as friends a little bit since he was dating your friend. Had you noticed him?
I mean, and my friend at the time, when she realized that he was moving in on me, she said, no. You can't date him. And she was my very best friend. And so I decided, well, I mean, it's just Gary, and I'm not going to mess up friendship with Audrey.
Mhm.
And so I just said, no, 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 no. However,
Well, I'd asked her that night after church, I asked her if I could take her home. And she said, well, we have a ride. I knew they didn't have a car, just her and her mother. And she said, we have a ride. She said, I'm with my mother. I said, well, I'll take your mother, She said, no, they already had a ride. So I gave them time to get home. And I went up to her house and knocked on the door and asked her if I could come in and talk with her.
Wow. You were single-minded there.
I love the persistence.
And we had a long conversation in which she shared with me that afternoon, when she talked to her best girlfriend, she told her, leave me alone. And I said, well, you can do what you want to. It's your decision. I said, but I'm not going back to her. She broke my heart one time. It's not going to happen again. So I went on back to school, and we started a long distance relationship.
And so in those days, that meant handwritten letters, right?
Only letters.
Letters. We couldn't afford a phone call, and the internet was not out. So it was writing letters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So have you?
But I wasn't really committed to the idea yet.
Okay.
And so he just laid the letters on me,
Oh, yeah.
And I would send him a letter about every month or something. But he was persistent.
And then she went off to college, and then she started dating another guy.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I was thinking, man, come on. She's not the same place I am in this thing.
So how did you convince her he was the wrong guy for her?
Well, I don't know that I convinced her. I think she came to realize that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I dated him for a year and a half at school,
Yeah.
I was writing her letters all the time.
Oh, that was what I was wondering. So while she was dating him, the letters kept coming, huh?
Oh, they kept coming. And the guy that I was dating, we were standing outside one day talking outside of the cafeteria. And he knew that I was getting these letters from Gary.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was standing there with a letter in my hand, and he said, he's going to keep on writing you until he gets you.
Oh.
He was a true prophet.
He was. Now, did you?
So that summer, we both came home. So I was seeing her that whole summer, and he was writing letters.
Oh.
I like this better,
Yeah.
I like this better. We're together.
Who's the better letter writer then?
Well, apparently I am, or maybe I just wrote more letters.
There you go. So how did it shift from kind of letter writing and this kind of friendship developing to something more?
Well, I think by the end of those 2 years, and the year I graduated from Wheaton, which was a long time ago, 1960 to be exact.
Okay.
I said to her, we were really thinking seriously about getting married at that point. But I said, we need to spend more time together. So what if you transfer to a college back home? I'll go to a seminary in North Carolina, and we can spend every weekend, together. We come home to our parents and spend every weekend together for a whole year. So we both agreed to that because we were very interested. We thought it was going to lead to marriage, but we wanted to spend more time together. So that's how it worked. And at the end of that summer, or end of that year, we got married in August of that year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So that was good. That was quick.
Well,
Well, the groundwork
it's a long relationship with letters.
That's right. The groundwork was laid. And Karolyn, for you, what was it about Gary that made you realize he'd be a good lifetime partner?
Well, as I said, I had known him forever.
Yeah.
And I knew that he was a good man. He was a righteous person. He was a strong believer. He was everything that a person would want. But I thought at the time, he's too good for me. And for, because I was out living my life like I wanted to live in my life, and didn't really commit my life to the Lord until 18, 19, but all those years, I was involved with him in the youth ministry at the church. So I knew him, and I knew his family, and I knew what kind of person he really was.
Mm-hmm.
And even though my friend had been in love with him and he with her. After a while, after he had broken up and did all those things he said, I realized, well, my mother told me, actually, she told me I would never do better.
Oh, okay.
Her mother was on my side.
Yay, Mom.
Well, that was one of my questions. What did your families think of each other during this dating period? Did you have support from your friends and family for this relationship?
Well, my mother had a few little words to say. Are you really sure about this girl now? I mean,
Well, mothers are that way.
Yes.
but I volunteered to paint the house of her mother. And after I painted her house, she really loved
Good
me.
move.
Nice.
Good move.
Acts of service
yes.
right there.
Acts of service.
And your mom loved Gary?
Oh, mother loved Gary. Yes. Oh, well, everybody loved Gary.
Her mother had 10 children. Karolyn was next to the last.
Oh.
I told her mother, I'm glad you kept having babies.
That's right.
It was the night.
So with your families that you grew up in, what did you learn about marriage from kind of your parents and family friends kind of witnessing marriage that informed kind of your young marriage?
I think on my side, my parents were strong Christians. We went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. And as Karolyn said, we were in the youth group and everything. They were very strong Christians and a strong work ethic. I learned that, I think, from my parents. Dad had a garden every summer and mother canned everything that we grew in the garden. So I learned how to plant and bring in the crops and all of that sort of thing. So work ethic was really, really strong. And their commitment to each other. And I only had one sister. There was just two of us in our family. And they taught us how to do things. Like my sister would wash dishes one night after dinner. I'd wash dishes the next night. We just went back and forth on that. So I learned how to wash dishes, which was really great for my marriage. But I think those things and seeing them relate, and not that they were perfect parents. My dad would lose his temper once in a while, and I would hear him say, kind of harsh things to my mother, and that didn't feel good for me. And I never remember him apologizing to her. Maybe he did, when they were in private. I don't know. But I don't know, emotionally, that was disturbing for me, to hear him speak to her harshly. But I don't know if they talked about it or mom just got over it, and it didn't happen often.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the only negative thing that I remember. Other than that, it was all very positive in my family. Karolyn's family was somewhat different.
Oh, totally different, because my father did not go to church. And so he was not at all involved in my spiritual life at all.
Mm-hmm.
And but he was a very humble, sweet man. And he was a good man. He was a very good man. And his work ethic was just, he worked. And but my mother saw to it that her children were in church. And of course, back then, church meant Sunday morning, Sunday school, and the church service. Sunday night, Wednesday night, and you didn't miss any of it. You went to those services. And she saw to it that we were in church for sure. And but the relationship between them, I was thinking about it, as Gary mentioned, that as a possibility that we talk about. And I just remember my daddy always being very sweet and always being there and working hard. But he they had a life before I came along. So with 7 boys before me.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a girl. So they were together in this thing, but not spiritually.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm sure.
But my mother, I credit my mother with the fact
7.
that,
Yeah. That she kept you guys kind of with a spiritual foundation.
Oh yeah. Now, we were in a very legalistic church, and I didn't fit in the mold. And so I think that's why Gary's mom was a little disturbed when she realized that he was chosen me, because in our church and in that particular time, in a legalistic background, you know, here I was, majorette. I led the band down the parade in the middle of the street without any clothes on.
I can
That's what my
picture that.
mother said.
That's what she said. Yeah. And I played basketball. I was a basketball star in high school. And, I was just involved in things that she didn't feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
Nowadays I can't, we can't even fathom such a thought. But
Right.
At that particular time, in that particular era,
Yes.
in that particular kind of legalistic church, and I'm sure there's still legalistic churches, it's just that that's what I was reared in.
Right. And so you didn't fit the picture of that good church girl kind of in
No.
But my mother didn't resist.
No,
she didn't try to stop us. She just kind of warned me. She's had some concerns about those things.
Yeah.
But she came to love her. They had a good relationship all of my mother's
goodness
life.
gracious.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds
Precious
like you
thing.
two had a good start. And I know, Gary, you say a lot about, that euphoria of early love has a shelf life of about 2 years. What was it for the two of you when you got married? How long did that early, ooey gooey love feeling
Tingles.
last? And
So let me tell you,
and did it get difficult at some point?
we dated 2 years, letters in that 1 year, the last year together.
Yep.
So I came down off that high pretty soon after the honeymoon. And I realized that everything my mother told me about her was true.
Moms know.
Well, both of us came into the relationship with our expectations,
Right.
as everybody does.
Yeah.
And ours were quite different. His was, I expect, and it was the era too.
Yeah.
Women and wives were expected to be, well, do I use this word? Obedient.
Mhm. Well, I mean,
I wasn't-
it's in the vows, right? It's in the vows.
I think it is.
Yeah, and you talking about your
The
expectations.
interpretation of that. though,
Right,
is-
exactly. Yes, it can be different. But are you talking about your expectation of marriage itself, of what marriage was, or about each other and how
Each
you would
other.
be?
I think.
Yeah, I just assumed that we would agree on most things because when we were dating, we didn't have a lot of conflicts, and we just found that we disagreed on almost everything.
Yeah.
And we didn't know how to solve conflicts because we had 1 hour with a pastor before we got married. Never read a book on marriage, no premarital counseling.
Well, the
except
reason
that 1
we
hour.
didn't read a book is there were no books written back in the dark ages.
If they were, we didn't know where, we never saw them.
They were on clay tablets, right? Of like,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, we had to learn how to solve conflicts, which was huge. And that doesn't happen overnight. If if you didn't know how to do it and how to listen to the other person rather than trying to convince them that you're right. I knew I was right, whatever the topic was, and she knew she was right.
Mhm.
She tried to convince me. I tried to convince her. So, we ended up yelling at each other, something I never, ever thought we would ever do.
yeah.
And I remember one night it was pouring down rain outside and we were in the middle of an argument and she just walked out the front door into the rain. And I thought, man, this is really bad. If
Yeah.
a woman walks into rain, it's bad.
Yes.
So it was a journey for us. We never went for marriage counseling. I guess there were counselors back then, but I didn't know any counselors. And so fortunately, we both had a deep commitment that marriage was a covenant.
Oh, there was no such thing. I mean, now, what'd you say? The couple state, what was you said at the beginning about?
Oh, yeah. So people married over 50 years, only 5% of marriages make that.
5%. Isn't that incredible? Yeah, but at that particular time, 60 years ago, in Christendom, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
there was no such thing as we'll divorce.
Yeah.
I mean, divorce was just not even anywhere in our minds or our experiences or anything. I didn't know anybody that ever divorced.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And
that was
counseling had a bit of a different stigma then too.
It did.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But I was in seminary, like 2 weeks after we married, I was in seminary.
Mhm.
And
oh, wow.
so, I noticed there was a counseling course. So I took the counseling course. I thought, well, this might help me. So I did learn. I learned some things about listening to the other person, and empathetic listening, trying to understand where they're coming from and why they're feeling the way they feel, and not trying to talk them out of their feelings and all that sort of thing. So, things began to turn. It took time, but eventually we got it together, even before I discovered the 5 love languages.
It's amazing. And Gary, I was reading Married and Still Loving It, the book that you had, and being able to talk through stories with people there. And there's a piece that really struck me, and it was the seminary conversation that you talked about, because I know for Tara and I in grad school, that was probably one of the darkest times of our relationship, of just the focus on I know for me, of focusing on academics, not being emotionally available. And then when I was just practicing my marriage techniques that I learned in my counseling class of, so honey, what I hear you saying is, and she would
that didn't
respond,
go over very well.
No, I've heard that line too. Honey,
Yeah.
what I hear you say. Because
I thought I was doing a great job, and it ended up just causing more problems. She would say, I need David, not a therapist. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that anymore. I'm trained so well. But you kind of talked about that in seminary, of that difficult time. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about that story, because that seemed like a pivotal time in your marriage.
It was a huge time. Yeah. I just came to the place where, here I was in seminary studying to be a pastor. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way this cannot work. I cannot get up and preach hope to people and be this miserable in my marriage. I can't do that. And I finally said to God, I don't know what else to do. I've done everything I know to do, and it's not getting any better. And as soon as I said that, there came to my mind a visual image of Jesus on his knees washing the feet of his disciples. And I just heard God say, that's the problem in your marriage. You do not have that attitude toward your wife. Because I remember what Jesus said after he got through washing their feet. He said, you call me leader, and you're right. But in my kingdom, the leader serves. And I wept. And I said, God, forgive me. With all of my study in theology, I'm missing the whole point. And I said, please give me the attitude of Christ toward Karolyn. In retrospect, it's the greatest prayer I ever prayed about my marriage, because God changed my heart and gave me a desire to serve her. And 3 questions made it practical after God changed my attitude, that I'm here to serve her, not to tell her what to do. The 3 questions were, honey, what can I do to help you? Second question, how can I make your life easier? And the third question, how can I be a better husband? And she was willing to answer every one of those questions.
Believe you me, I was. Yes. How can I make your life better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Looking back on it, I knew nothing about love languages, of course, but looking back on it, her answers were telling me her love language.
Yep.
She was telling me how to serve her,
Exactly.
how to make her life easier. And I started doing those things. And like washing dishes and vacuuming floors and cleaning toilets, which I didn't do any of that in the beginning of our marriage. And then she started giving me words of affirmation, which, she hadn't been giving me any, I guess, because she didn't think I was worthy of any. But she started thanking me and telling me how wonderful I was, et cetera. And really about 3 months later, or about 3 months, she started asking me those 3 questions. Well, honey, let's turn this around. and she started asking me those 3 questions. And then from there on, we were moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
We continued to learn how to help each other, how to minister to each other, how to enrich each other's lives. And that I think is really the key to marriage, is we have to have an attitude of love, that I'm here to serve. I'm here to help you become the person you believe God wants you to be. And whenever we do that on both sides, when it's going both ways, then you're going to have the kind of marriage you wanted to have, which is loving and supportive and caring. So yeah, that was a big turning point in my mind.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. And I think when we ask them, we have to be prepared to actually do what the person asked for, right? Oh, you want me to clean the toilet? Oh, okay.
Miss Karolyn, what was it like for you when did Gary tell you right away, I had this epiphany, I met Jesus washing feet and I want to wash yours?
No, he didn't tell me. It was his attitude, his approach, his doing, just doing what God had spoken to him about. And I'm sure, I don't remember this specifically, but I'm sure at the time it was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
He's a different, he's treating me differently.
Yeah.
And, so I started listening to what was happening.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the way it happened,
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Like I said, I don't remember specifics.
But those moments when people respond differently to us gives us space to respond differently, rather than just the old cycles and kind of anticipating what the person's going to say and kind of just be in your head, not really listening, but preparing your response. When it's different, there's space to be like, oh, now I need to think about how I want to respond, rather than just the automatic response, whether it's from our families we grew up in or automatic responses from our own patterns. And it seems like you broke a pattern that then gave space for, Gary, what you talked about is not the tingly love, but the attitudinal love.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what happened to me and to us when we came down off that high, not only did we lose the euphoric feelings, but I began to have negative feelings toward her. And she had negative feelings toward me. Because, when you sense like, well, they're not paying attention, they don't care.
It was a behavioral thing, really.
Yeah.
The way we were treating.
Yeah, that's got to be scary when you're already having those feelings so early in a marriage and thinking, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
Yeah, the night that I walked out of the house and that first year, I probably would have gone home to Mother. I probably would have stayed, but I probably would have gone home to Mother, just because to escape all this. It was, the emotional stuff going on. But we were 1,200 miles away from my mother. Fortunately, it was a good thing that we were out there with no family, and we had to resolve this.
Yeah.
Because, as I said earlier, there was no getting out of it. So you look at it for what it is and what you got. And then this experience that Gary had and how it affected me then. Yeah.
So I'm curious, that's a really solid foundation that you develop through difficult times. And I think it's important for all of us to think about that it's not avoiding the difficult times. It's actually leaning into them that can build strength for a 62-year marriage and relationship together. I'm curious, how did kids coming into the picture? Now, you didn't have 10 kids, but how did kids coming into the picture affect your marriage? I know that's a little while ago.
Well, before we got married, Karolyn said when we were dating, she wanted to have 5 children. She wanted to have 5 boys. I was in love at that time, and I said, whatever you want, honey, it's fine with me. But our first one was a girl. And in those days, there was no ultrasound. You didn't know what the baby was, boy or girl, until it was born.
Yeah.
So when our daughter was born, and I could not be there when the baby was being born. The husband was not allowed in the delivery room.
Right.
And when I did walk in after the baby was born, Karolyn had our daughter on her lap, and she said to me, of course, she was still under some sedation. She said to me, It's a little girl, but I couldn't help it.
So you loved
And then
having
the
all
doctor,
those brothers. You must have loved having a house full of boys.
oh, oh yeah, my brothers were precious.
Yeah.
The doctor said to Gary, when I said that to him, that don't you worry about it. She'll have him wrapped around her little finger in no time.
The doctor was right.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Oh Lordy, their relationship even to this day is precious.
Oh, so
We're
sweet.
very grateful.
Precious.
It really changes us having sons
Oh.
and daughters, changes our hearts.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
and it changes our roles as as a couple as well. And I find that's where a lot of people kind of rearrange their relationship because the roles change, the expectations change, and often we bring in the expectations of our parents' relationship and how they handled, who was with the kids the most. So how did that work out for the two of you? Did you find that made things more difficult, or did you enjoy that together?
I think with our daughter, I think it was just an enjoyable thing. I was actually out of seminary and I was pastoring a church.
Mm.
And of course, we had a lot of friends we developed in the church, when she was born, and she was just a delight. She was there. Karolyn had a lot of friends, and I had friends and that sort of thing. So it was when our son came along 4 years later, and he began. I mean, when he was little, it was not a whole lot of struggles with
Oh
us.
no, we adored him. I was so excited about having a little boy.
But when he got to be a teenager, I remember the day Karolyn said, I don't know how old he was. She said, "He's your son. I give up."
He was about 16, but we had really not had. We often say now that we did not rear Shelley, our daughter.
No.
She just knew what to do and always did it.
She's
right.
raised herself.
And to this day, this is true. She was just, she was just that kind of temperament, personality. And, but then Derek came and he was more like his mother. And he had a mind of his own. And this is the way I do it. And I don't care if you like it or not, we absolutely adored him. And to this day, he's a dear.
Yeah. And he's absolutely, but both of our kids as adults, well, even in the teenage years, they were committed to Christ, but they're both passionate about Christ. And, after all, that's for a parent, nothing's better than having your children walking with God,
That's right. And the Karolyn, I'm thinking about the son and daughter that are most like me are the hardest ones for me to navigate. And I'm so glad that I have Tara because she deals with me and she knows how to deal with someone like me. Where I get frustrated because I see the parts of me I don't like in them, and I'm like, I can parent that out of them. I couldn't figure it out in myself, but I'll parent that out of them. And luckily, I have a partner that is just like, yeah, you might want to just take a minute and breathe before you respond.
Yeah, when she said he's your son, I give up. Because they were just at it all the time, with each other. But I listened to him, I wanted to hear his side of things. And so we learned. And I have a book on anger, and I talk about the time I really learned to handle anger was with my teenage son.
Yeah.
When we were yelling and screaming at each other, at 13 or 14 years old. And one night he walked out the door like his mother did and walked up. I didn't know if he was going to come back or not.
Yeah.
And when he walked out the door, my lights came on, and I said, "Oh God, I thought I was further along than this, yelling at the son I love. What's wrong with me?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wept and just asked God to teach me how to handle this, because that was kind of a crucial night. But when he walked back in the door, and Karolyn tried to console me, but she said, "Honey, it was his fault. I heard the whole thing. He's got to learn how to respect you." Da 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 da. But it was hard to console me because I knew I was wrong. I was yelling at him, and I was thinking that's how he learned to yell at me. He heard me yelling at him.
Yeah.
And he walked back in, and I just asked him to sit down. And I said, "Derek, I want to apologize to you, man." I said, "No father should ever talk to a son the way I talk to you."
Mm.
And I said, I said some horrible things to you. And I said, I lost my temper, and I don't mean any of those things. I love you very much. And I just poured my heart out to him, asked me if he would forgive me. And he said, Dad, that was not your fault. He said, I started that. And he said, as I walked up the road, I asked God to forgive me. And I want to ask you to forgive me. And we both wept. We just hugged and wept and cried. And then I said, Derek, why don't we try to learn how to talk our way through anger rather than yelling our way through anger? So the next time you get angry, what if you just say, Dad, I'm angry. Can we talk? And I'll just sit down and listen to you. And if I get angry with you, I'll say, Derek, I'm angry. Can we talk? And let's learn how to listen to each other and solve things, work through our things. And that was a turning point, for both of us. And I think a lot of times parents fail to apologize to their children when they treat their children harshly, and the children grow up with kind of disconnected with the parent. And I really believe that apologizing to your children when you know you were not kind and you were not tender and you were not loving is a huge step in keeping a good relationship with our children.
It's being honest and it's modeling. It's those two things, and those are powerful for kids and for dealing with each other.
I was going to say, it's so applicable to any relationship, isn't it? That just taking that stance and saying I'm sorry and trying a different way of communicating. Was this after the time that you had been developing the 5 love languages?
No,
this was before.
This was before.
Yeah, this was long before.
It was before.
Yeah.
It was before that. Yeah.
So you've had a lot of life experience leading up to not just your clinical work, but your family work and life to kind of give you that information personally, academically, story-wise for building the 5 love languages. You lived them before you wrote them.
I did. Yeah. And it really, all of my books really have been an outgrowth of my counseling and my experience in marriage and in the family. Really, I mean, all of it's basically grown out of. It's an overflow of what I've learned.
Well, you were in counseling for years and years. You've been counseling.
Yeah.
So he has files full of these.
Yes, I bet.
These stories. It's not just our story. It's a lot of people's story.
Yeah.
I'm in the last several years, I married several couples whom I married their parents. And now I'm married them.
Wow. So you can see the intergenerational kind of process there.
Yeah, there's an advantage to staying in the same place a long time. I've served on the same church staff for 50 years. And July a year ago, I officially retired, but they let me keep my office and let me keep my assistant. So if I'm in town, I'm still in the office every day.
Oh, that is great. And it probably is healthy for a relationship too, right, Karolyn? Do you like him going to the office?
Very, very wise. Yes, I'm sure. Now, I never experienced him being at home, like what happens after the husband retires.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it would have really been, but I have friends, and do I have girlfriends who would love for their husbands to go to the office.
Yes, we always say it's good to have things together and it's good to have our things apart. Always. And you just have so many years of experience in learning about relationships and each other. I'm curious, after 62 years of marriage, if you still are able to surprise each other. Are there any unique challenges to being married this long, or joys, or things that you still learn about each other after being together this long?
Well, I don't know that it's a new thing, because he's always been very compassionate and caring, except in those early days when he hollered. But basically, he's a very caring person and a humble person. But in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe, I have my health has not really been really good, and I have seen. He cares for me. He speaks my love language, and he is so caring. So, when you reach a certain time in life and you may be having health problems or whatever, it's kind of nice to have somebody who hears you, and they're doing it out of love. They're caring for you. They're listening to you. They're, to you.
Yeah. In the book, we talk about, in that book you mentioned about on the second half of marriage, that the couples who thrive in the second half, one of the characteristics is that they have not only come to accept the differences that kept them apart in the early years, but they've come really to appreciate them, to laugh about them, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. One of the illustrations I sometimes use is the dishwasher, because I organize it. I'm organized. Everything.
Oh, is he ever organized?
And Karolyn loads the dishwasher like she's playing frisbee. So, and the other thing is that in sickness and in health, that line that we all said, in sickness and in health.
Yeah.
And 11 years ago, 11 or 12, she had cancer and went through, surgery and chemo and lost her hair and everything. She calls it her lost year. And when you go through something like that on the other side, you don't really pay much attention to the little things anymore. In fact, I remember not long ago, I opened the dishwasher in the morning because I always put them up because I'm a morning person. I take them out and put them up. And there was a knife laying horizontal rather than,
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I just started laughing. And I said, God, thank you that she's still here. Knives in however she wants to put them in.
Absolutely.
That's right.
That perspective is so huge.
The perspective. That's true.
Yeah. And I think that's a hard thing for people to learn at the early stages of marriage, because you just don't have that perspective yet. And that's really a benefit you have of looking backwards and having spent that time together. And it's not easy. Going through the hard times, I think, gives you that strength too, of knowing that you do appreciate each other. And it seems like you still make each other laugh, which we think is number one.
Love that. I think friendship and humor are some of the foundational glue when we move past kind of our commitment to Christ and how our relationship is about worshiping Him, and that frees us up to respond to each other. Then it's having fun and enjoying the uniqueness of each other. I loved how you said that, Gary, of the things that you learn to kind of understand, you can kind of appreciate and find humor in and enjoyment in.
Yeah.
So we want to ask this question because I think everybody listening has been married fewer years than you all.
Probably.
And so
it's likely.
Is there anybody been married longer?
Not more than 90 years, Karolyn.
So what's a word of hope or a story that you can think of that would be helpful to pass along to new couples looking to kind of have a lasting relationship that is 62 plus years together?
You take this. Hope.
I would say, well, first of all, I would say your relationship with God is foundational. Because if you don't have a commitment to Christ and to the scriptures, then it's where a lot of our world is today. There's no right and wrong. You just do what you want to do, and that's never going to lead to a healthy marriage, just doing what you want to do. I think the other thing is that a healthy marriage is not built on emotion. It's built on attitudes and behavior. And I think, again, that's why in our culture today, so many people say, well, you're just not making me happy, or I just don't feel loved by you anymore. And they bail out because they don't have these feelings. So I think a commitment to Christ and the scriptures and the foundation that marriage is a covenant between you, the two of you, and in the presence of God and witnesses. To me, that's foundational. And if you have that, then you have all the help of God to change you to being the person that you need to be in the relationship. And we can't change our spouse. We know that. We've all said that you can't change your spouse. But you can influence your spouse. And the more you become like Christ in your attitude toward your spouse, the more profound is your positive influence on that person. The Bible says we love God because he first loved us.
Mm.
Well, we choose to love our spouse when we're not feeling loved by them, but we choose to speak their language and have the attitude of Christ. They'll be influenced to respond to you. Doesn't mean they will. They can still walk away because people walk away from God, but they're far more likely to respond to you in a different way because of the change they see in your life. So it can start with a husband or a wife, for that matter. But if one of them has that kind of commitment to become more and more like Christ, they're doing the most powerful thing they can do to influence the other person. That's not one word, but
that's a good word.
That's a good word.
It's very good.
It's a very good word. And, Miss Karolyn, how are you going to add to that?
I'm not going to add to that. I think that's profound enough.
That's
It
right.
is. And
That's right.
and that's why it's so valuable to hear stories from people like you who've been through all of this and still love each other and have worked through the hard times, because it is our cultural message that we're there to get what we need from the person that we're with. And that doesn't last very long, and I think that's why we have failing marriages and, kind of an attitude that once it's done, it's done. So it's countercultural to work through that and to say, I'm going to love you even when I don't feel loved by you.
That is totally countercultural.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's hard work, but the rewards are so rich. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely. I wish every couple could have what we have had, through the years and work through the problems, because there'll always be conflicts in those early years because we're human.
Yeah.
And, but I wish they could experience the joy on the other side of all of that when you do learn to work it out and to give your lives trying to enrich each other. I mean, it's just tremendous satisfaction and joy to experience that, which is what all of us want when we get married, is that we're going to be loving and supportive and caring of each other and be there for each other.
It's kind of the deepest human need.
Reality sets in, and as was with us, my expectations and his expectations, oh my goodness, about everything. But the answer, of course, you've heard for us.
Yeah.
That how we had to deal with it, and we did, because we didn't have an option.
Yeah. And it was about entering in attitudinal. I love how you talked a little bit about the rigid kind of faith background. The faith that you're talking about now isn't that rigid. Here's the right thing we need to do. It's how do we live together and find a path in that attitudinal of love, rather than the man needs to be doing this, the woman needs to be doing that, because that wouldn't have worked for you all.
No, it's less about roles and more about loving as Jesus loved, no matter who we are.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's a joy for us to see you after all these years, having worked through the hard times and enjoying the good times and being a steady anchor for each other and for so many other people, for your family and for the people who listen to you. And we're so thankful that you shared your story with us.
Thank you. We're having fun.
that's key.
Keep having fun.
Keep having fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and God bless you for what you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thanks for being with us today. We hope you'll get more information about everything we talked about today on our show notes page on the website.
I was going to say, where could we find the show notes page?
withyoupodcast.com.
Awesome.
And also, while you're at it, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review, and let us know what you're thinking.
Can we ask that it's only good reviews?
You can ask anything you want.
Okay, leave good reviews. We would love to hear from you and respond. So
thanks for listening.
See you next time.